Hey, good morning. Today is another one of our first fives. Today we're looking at this story from Matthew chapter 13, beginning with verse 24. It's called the parable of the weeds. So one of the reasons I think it's so appropriate for us is as we read this story, we might be able to picture some of it our own understanding of the world in which we live. In fact, Jesus actually goes on to explain this story, but I'll read it and then we'll kind of talk about it for just a brief moment. Matthew 13:24 says this: Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, when the weeds also appeared, the owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring them into my barn." So one of the things I love about this story is that if we were to think about people as the crop, right? So we're the crop in this story. And Jesus is saying, listen, when stuff's sown, like there's good things sown in there, but what we find over time is often there is an enemy that exists in the world. There's evil, there's sinfulness, there's brokenness that exists. It's why Jesus often talks about principalities and powers of darkness, not people who are broken, or not people who are the enemy, right? Like he makes it pretty clear, our enemies are not flesh and blood, but the principalities and powers of darkness. And so in this particular illustration, what we begin to see is Jesus is teaching them something that's really important for us. We must be slow to declare something bad or something good. In fact, our judgment should be incredibly slow. What I find so often is sometimes we'll go, "Oh, so-and-so is so good." And then over time, we get to know them like, "Oh, so-and-so, like the fruit of their life, what they're producing, it's not good crop." Or other times, we'll go, "Oh, that person, I can't believe them. Do you know their history? Do you know what they have done? Do you have any understanding?" And then over time, you'll begin to look at their life and you'll go, "Oh, I didn't realize how awesome they really are. Man, they're really faithful to God, or they're really generous towards others, or whatever it might be." You see, often our first understanding, our first reaction, our first judgments are not that good. And so one of the lessons we learn in this, and if we go to read Jesus' response to this, we learn that sometimes we need to be slower to judge. In fact, if we go read Jesus' words in another chapter of this same book, in Matthew chapter 7, he says, "Be careful of the measure you judge, or you too will be judged in that same measure." In other words, let's be incredibly gracious. Let's recognize that all people are created in the image of God. And sure, there is evil sown in amongst the good things in this world. But if we're not careful, we'll only see evil. Or if we're not careful, we'll only see good. And so both those are pitfalls. If we only see the good or we only see the bad, they're both negative. God calls us to see clearly. He calls us to see with wisdom. He calls us to see with discernment. And this is why spiritual maturity matters so much. Because if we're not careful, we'll be led astray by all the various teachings and things of the world. We'll find we're more shaped by our politicians, or by the talk show hosts on television, or who we listen to on the radio, than we are by the words of Jesus. And so it matters for us over time to let's make sure we are slow in our judgments. Let's make sure we are quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Let's find that over time, the more we spend time with Jesus, the more we recognize, we begin to see what really is a good crop and what really is a bad weed. And so we hope today you'll find yourself recognizing that you never know how we perceive the other person or how they perceive us. And so let's extend grace beyond where we think it even should go, because that's who God is. And at the end of the day, He's the one who gets to sort out the good crop and the bad crop, not you and I. And so we'll catch you next time for another First Five.